Connor, excited for episode 3 today?
I am indeed, yes.
Yeah, so we've got an interesting conversation today, leading off from the last one. Obviously, heuristics were a really interesting topic last time, and you got some feedback, I think, from some of the people you're working with, and some when you're busy networking, as you like to do.
certainly did, yeah. So we'll try and incorporate some of those changes today.
Yeah. So what was the feedback you got anyway? It was just
the main one was that I think the fact that we spoke about, say for example, the Asch experiment, which we'll go over again today, I think the assumption was that we were assuming that everyone knows what we're talking about at that instance, which might not be the case, because a lot of times, psychology, you might not cross paths with that for any particular reason. Now you have, because obviously you done a little bit of that in school, and then later on in university, and I done it obviously for professional exams, so that was the only reason that came to the forefront for my attention. So when we're talking about that, obviously maybe we are too in the fishbowl with the revision and research, for example, so we're just having that assumption. So I think it's opportune to take the time, take a step back and explain what this actual experiment is, why it's relevant, and why we think there's wider implications, which we'll obviously try to do today.
So I understand that completely. Even when you and Herc are busy talking about finance related things, and sometimes I'll pick up next. I've maybe heard that thing before, but a lot of the time you would just throw something at me, and I'll be like, I don't know what that means, so so I don't understand the implications. No, I think that's a standard thing. Like when a lot of the podcasts that we like and the people that we respect a lot, you see them as the kind of the high end ones. A lot of the time they need to stop their guest and go, right, okay, we need to explain that to the audience as well. Yeah, because there's so much to know that you can't expect people, as you said. You know what you know, so you think everyone else knows it.
Absolutely. Well, I know, for example, when I'm watching, say, Lex Friedman, and they've got a astrophysicist on, unfortunately for them, they make it understandable in a way for myself to comprehend. But the way to do that as well is taking it back a step and explaining, well, this was the experiment, this is what it was intending to prove, for example, this is what it actually proved, and then here's the actual implications as to why we think that may be damaging for society or beneficial for society. Instead
of just going that's Bohr's theorem, you go, I understand, let's move on.
Absolutely, So string theory, right? And then, so it's opportune, I think, to take.
So do you want to introduce the topic we've brought up today?
Yeah, gladly. So like you said, it sort of feeds on from the previous topic, which was episode 2's heuristics. So this one actually looks at 3 sort of big topics, which relate to compliance, conformity, and obedience. Now again, the sort of rationale for that was off the back of the Asch experiments, and then obviously some of the criticisms and feedback that we received, which was really appreciated. And then obviously that spawned on a few other ideas, such as the obedience and compliance, which I know that you're really interested into.
When I done psychology, and way back in high school, we had the college classes went and done. That was a lot of what the course was. I think it was the first 6 months. You can understand why after a lot of schooling was geared towards the post-World War II period. I think that's what a lot of it was focused. Let's not let this happen again. It's not working. But so it was really enjoyable. I really liked it, and the 3 different topics I think are really useful, because once you understand them and you start looking about, especially the experiments are very clear that it's super common. So you look at it and you can see it everywhere.
And very revealing as well.
Yeah, very, very revealing, very revealing. So
like we've said, there's 3 big topics, the compliance, obedience, and conformity. Would you mind just giving us a little sort of brief distinction between them?
Sure. So compliance is when a person's negotiating between a sort of a state of someone with a bit of power over them. So you can think of that the way, in an institutional sense, that's how the courts work, it's how the police work, it's how government works. When government comes out, can I tell you something? And from the individual's point of view, what they're trying to do is basically negotiate with themselves. I don't really hold these principles or beliefs or opinions that this decision making is coming from, but just to make life a little bit easier, I might as well go along with it. It's basically how the incentive structures lead a person down a line through the path of least resistance, but that person does not believe in the beliefs. They don't internalize them in any sort of way. They're just going, okay, that's what they are, I better do this to get on. And you can see how people might do that in their work, or after recent political events following along. Conformity is a wee bit different. Conformity is more social pressure, so you can see that as the informal version of compliance, where that person is then looking towards the group for cues and how they should behave, and they do that in two situations. Either when they don't know what they're doing, so confusion would bring it about, and they're looking to the group to answer, they're basically relieve that anxiety for them. So if you go out into a situation like a meeting late and everyone's staring at the board and you don't know why, you're probably just going to stop what you're doing and stare at the board, because you don't want to be the only person not doing that and then get put up. The other way people do it is to just be liked, and that's a wee bit more insidious in a way. Whereas like you can see that in school with like bullies. A lot of people get into bullying because one kid doesn't like another kid, but he's got a bunch of friends. They're saying that, well, I better start picking on this kid too, because if I don't, I'm going to be the one that's excluded.
Yes.
So it's safety within the group.
Yeah.
Obedience is the most notorious, I think, of the three of them. I think when you hear obedience, it seems people feel that way, especially after World War II and what's happened there, and obviously we're going to talk about that a wee bit later. But obedience is basically when you've internalised this decision making instead of just placing it on the group. You can see like somebody that's conforming might not actually believe what they're doing, but they're just, I better get along because I want the group to survive. Where an obedient person's internalised this decision making from the group, and they started to believe it as their own opinions and their own principles. And so the two ways that tends to happen is from a legitimised authority, which you can imagine, like if you go to the doctor, he tells you there's something wrong with you, you're going to believe him because he's an expert, he's a legitimised authority. But what happens if the doctor tells you there's nothing wrong with you when there actually is something wrong with you? Then you're getting a sticky situation.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa. So, and the other way somebody does that is agentic theory, where somebody believes the authority is going to take the responsibility off of them for their action. So therefore they can carry out that action just as basically a tool of that other person. They give up their will to that person, so to speak. And you can see how this is useful in most organisations. It's necessary to a degree. You know, the police obviously need to do this. You need to put your own opinions aside, but that can lead to thinking, such as you find in Nazi Germany, where, you know, I'm just following orders. Yeah. And we don't see that as an excuse anymore. So
absolutely not. Yeah. So would I be right then in saying, for example, that compliance is effectively going along with an explicit request?
Yes.
Conformity is people adhering to unspoken rules?
Yes.
And obedience, basically you changing your behaviour to please that authority, so that you can avoid potential negative ramifications or consequences.
You're right. The only thing you're wrong about is the obedience part. The obedience, what signifies that is you've internalised it as well. So you're not just going along with it. You actually believe it now. You're part of that. Like
but are you internalising it because of a potential threat of?
You can do. You can do it. You can do it because it doesn't matter as long as it's a legitimised authority. Now it's down to you to decide what's
a legitimate authority.
What's a legitimate authority? Yeah. The second you've denoted something as legitimate authority, you're in some form obedient. Yeah. You're being obedient.
Yes.
To that authority. So we all do this. You know, it's a necessary factor of being human. All these things have a positive avenue to them. So you want people to comply with the law. You don't want people running about like, I don't believe in that law, I'm not going to do it. You need a bit of that fear there. Yeah. So people negotiate and go, might as well not do that.
It's a societal check and balance type of thing.
Societal check and balance. Yeah. It's just all these things can get out of hand. You want people to conform as well to a certain degree. You don't want everyone going off doing their no thing and then nobody can communicate anymore. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for example, so like trivially, I like people conforming to the social cue of, you know, holding the door open for someone. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. When people, you know, maybe if they're disagreeable and just or Machiavellian or highly narcissistic and just don't want to, you know, be that person, that annoys me. Yeah, I think, you know, get in line.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But then when it's you're leading Jews onto a train to send them somewhere, exactly. It's like, hey, just get in line. This is what we're all doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's how do you manage that? How do you balance that between these two things? And obedience is well that as well. The world is a complex place. Yeah. I don't understand everything about the world. I'm never going to. Yeah. I'm never going to understand anything about particularly even one subject. So you need to trust in other people that have maybe spent more time on that than you, but you're giving them something when you do that.
Yeah, what are you handing them over at that point? And it's a lot of trust.
Yeah, a lot of trust. So what people should do in light of that, I think, is to build up their own internal sense of like principles and worth, and take that as a priority to any other information coming their way, because then they can at least go, well, I can accept your information, but I'm not going to sacrifice these key beliefs that keep me in line in the way I want to be kept in line. Because if you don't have, you know, there's that saying, if you're too open-minded, your brain can fall out. You know, so if you're too open-minded to what somebody else is saying to you and you're just going to cast away everything you've built up yourself, even though you maybe should from that point of view, because he's an expert in the subject after all. But if you do that too quickly, you can easily be manipulated and led down really dark paths and scale up societal, and that's pretty much how most of the problems kind of that scale emerge.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So, as we were speaking about earlier, you wanted to talk about Asch, because I think you had a couple of corrections you wanted to make there.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think we can start with that one. First of all, what does the Asch experiment fall under? Does it fall under conformity, compliance, or obedience?
It falls under conformity.
Yeah.
Now, firstly, let me just start by making the correction from the last episode, which is unbelievably ironic, given that it was heuristics and stuff like that. But effectively, it was from the 50s was the study, not 1975 as I'd said. The 75 reference, I think I was conflating with the outcome of the experiment itself. So apologies, but
I thought it's easy done.
It's annoying. It's inconsistent with my notes. But anyway, so Solomon Asch experiments in the 50s, I believe it was 1951. Might even get that wrong just for the joy. So effectively, the purpose of this conformity test was to have 4 individuals who were part of the experiments, along with a other, which was the actual person that they're wanting to do the study on. Now, this person, for example, the question, very simply, like we referenced it last time, was to do with, like, say, ruler length. Now, the experiment itself, it gives you A, B, and C for all these rulers, right, in varying lengths. Now, it also has another separate ruler, and you're asked what out of A, B, and C does this one fit into, or what does it match in height and length, for example. The person who the study is actually on is at the end of the table, so they get the privilege of listening to the previous 4 answers. Now, it's quite clear. It is literally quite clear what is the correct answer. It's not any sort of overly difficult or onerous type of process. It's very simple and straightforward. It should be, for example, A. Yeah. Now, out of that instance or that experiment itself, when you're hearing the previous 4 answers of everyone saying B or C, i.e. clearly the wrong answer, then 75% of the time people will conform to their immediate group. Yeah. Which is absolutely crazy. Terrifying. It really is, because again, that explains a lot of things which happen in society. You know, even trends, for example. People might not even like back it or understand it, but they want to jump on the bandwagon. Again, maybe that's the obedience and conformity, along with, they all bleed into each other. They all bleed into each other. It's hard to differentiate at times. But Solomon Asch, he was basically a groundbreaking experiment for conformity in itself. Which again, they did actually extend it a little bit with some variations. One of them being the task difficulty in itself. But again, that's not really a huge issue, because again, it's like ruler length, for example. It's nothing really too, difficult. The other thing is, if you were to have a different group size, for example, from one other person up to 15, I believe the study was using. Each time, if it went to one person listening, it would have a little bit of a varying, say like 5-10% conformity. Each time you were adding someone, it would add a little bit more. But the optimal people, or optimal sort of structure, was 3. That's when you'd get basically over half conforming, just to like 3 other people. So all it takes is 3. Yeah. That in itself is, that's the concerning point from my perspective. 3 people is all you need to take, like listening to. And if you're weak-minded enough and not strong-willed or easily led, then you can just fall into that. It's quite funny how it's right at the barrier where things are now considered a crowd. So it's like crowd psychology. And that's the second you go into that thing. What's everyone else doing? Well, that's absolutely. Well, Douglas Murray's actually got a great book on that. The Madness of Crowds. Yeah, it's a really good book. Probably a topic for another day, but still. The last sort of variation that Solomon Asch done to the experiments was, now I'm going to butcher this word, but unanimity. Basically. In the current studies, the people that agree to the answer beforehand, it's all unanimous. They all agree that it's B or C, for example, i.e. not the right answer. Thereafter, they started to change the other people in the group. So, for example, have one other person actually give the correct answer, and you'll be surprised at how quickly the rate of conformity falls. It goes from 75% to 5%.
So I mean, basically disappears. You could basically say that 5% is maybe somebody's not been paying attention, or
Yeah.
you're going to get a couple of them in the room like, oh, what are we doing? You know,
But
I don't even know where I am.
But that's all it takes, so that can also neutralise it. Now, again, there's a distinction between it being the correct answer and being another wrong answer, for example. But even just for the point of being having one other person just give a correct answer, basically underpinning or wiping out that conformity bias.
Yeah.
However, so it takes one person to, see the forest from the trees, type of thing.
Emperor's got no clothes kind of situation.
Yeah, but obviously on the inverse, all it takes is 3 to get you to go one way, and 1 to go the other.
Which does show you how easily influenced a normal person is. Because that's the thing, it's 75% of people, so it's a normal person. This isn't an extreme thing. This is the majority of people.
That's exactly it. So the main concern from myself anyway is how malleable people actually are, and how easily easily led and swayed they can be.
Yeah, it's weird in that situation as well, because it's not high stakes. It's so low stakes. It's just a line in the wall. Like, who cares,
Yeah.
And even then, if you were wrong, the smart way of going about it would be, there might be something wrong with my eyes, or maybe I've got a brain tumour or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not picking up
Coping mechanisms.
Yeah. Well, or maybe I'm just daft. You know what I mean?
But
like, if you'd want to face the truth in that situation, and just be wrong, and then you'd solve that. So in a way, by you lying about that, because what's going through that participant's head at the time must be, if that was me, I'd be like, what's wrong with him? Even if I believed that they weren't stooges and I'd been totally convinced of the experiment, I would just go, there's something wrong with me. Have I hit my head? I need to go get the opticians after this and get checked out. But it's like people don't want to deal with that, so they just...
I swear they were the same size.
Exactly. So
maybe I shouldn't drive back.
I do crack a joke with it for a lot of people, exactly. Maybe I should drive back. And it's weird how people will just push that under the rug, sweep it under the rug just to try and fit in that moment. I mean, maybe when they left the arena, oh my god, and they just don't want to be embarrassed at the time, but that's crazy. It is.
Because it could be like a self-preservation type thing as
well. Everyone's going to think you're the stupid one, innit? Nobody wants to be put in that category, because if you do believe they do genuinely believe that, everyone's going to look at you like, where's this guy? You think the line's small.
And as we discussed last time, humans love boxes and labels.
Yeah.
So...
And then you're stereotyped. A wee bit of labelling theory, that'll come at another time. Is there anything else about that study you found interesting or confusing?
Not particularly anything that's worth raising at this point. I think the last one we touched on was fine. This has sort of fleshed it out a little bit better and gave a little bit more context. So obviously people are really interested in the actual Solomon Asch experiments themselves and the variations, then they can quite easily just search it. It's quite interesting.
Do you think, looking up a bit, have you started to see conformity around about you? It doesn't need to be in a negative light. It could be, sometimes conformity is necessary. It's positive. Have you seen this in your day-to-day life at all?
Yeah, I've seen it quite humorously. This example isn't in my day-to-day life. This is just a normal sort of test, a societal test, if you will, where people get into like a lift and everyone's facing one way, and then they'll all turn, face the back wall, and eventually that person, will turn and face the same way because they want to be ostracised.
Yeah.
But I mean, just generally speaking, people will conform because it does, like a heuristic, is sort of an easier path. There's no reason just being, disagreeable for the sake of it. That's more anarchy type vibe.
Yeah.
But conforming itself does have, its place to a certain extent. I mean, look at China.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, like, they have the societal shaming. You step out, you jaywalk, and like basically cross the road without it being a green man, and your face is plastered on screens, and you lose, credit points. You can't,
Well, it's a face-based society, obviously, where reputation matters a lot, so therefore conformity is then easier to...
The huge underpinning of that.
Yeah, it's easier to forced in. I seen a good... it was a prank video on YouTube. One of the good ones, no one assaulting people or anything like that, but they let people go up escalators wearing like high green vis suits, and also looked all official with the hard hats and that. And when they got up to the top, there's another guy waiting for them, and he's sitting them back down.
Yeah.
And they got him going in a circle, 20 minutes.
20
minutes. And then there was a couple of people kicked off after like 5, but they still went up and down.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
What are you doing? And they send them back down the elevator.
I'm
back
visibly
up.
disgruntled, but I'm still following the orders.
Yeah, exactly. It's like straight up. And like, I think it took like 20 minutes before most of them had cleared out. I think one or two
Yeah.
bounced early, but they're the people that are like, oh, what's going on here?
Yeah.
We think. But it's scary how many people. So
Yeah.
like, I like to think when it's me that I wouldn't do that. I like to think I would just go, no, what's happening? No, the nonsense. I'm dipping. But there was an interesting stat I read about this early on. It was actually from a different experiment, but it was they gave them a test beforehand and asked them that question and snuck it in so they wouldn't know it's to do with the psychological experiment that's coming down the line. It was to do with, like, if you're a Nazi during World War II, do you think you would like hide Jews or get them out of the way, or do you think you would stand up against it? And 97% of people said they would. But then when they went on to do the experiment,
They would hide and help.
yeah,
people,
they would hide and help. But then when they went on to do the experiment, 73% of them complied and actually engaged in the activity, showing that they probably wouldn't have done that. They've probably been the ones helping.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny you mentioned that. So I've actually got 2 studies for you later on that show that.
No.
But anyway, in terms of the compliance side, there's nothing else that I'd probably add at this point, other than anecdotally type stuff. But in the sense of in the interest of brevity, so obedience. That was something that you were quite interested when we were doing this research. And
Yeah.
you actually got some examples. Well, could you just give us a quick recap again of that?
Yeah, I've got a couple of examples for obedience I would like to talk about, just to go over the general theory behind it first, so you
Yes,
get a wee bit
please.
of understanding. Is the first one would be legitimised authority. That's somebody you look up to, somebody you appreciate, somebody who's a holder of information that you draw on from your personal beliefs or anything like that. A doctor you would go visit, somebody who's a politician of a party you like.
Sure.
And basically, because you hold them as a speaker of truth, you just, anything they say, that is the reality. You internalise it yourself and you carry that out. You're not playing this game, you're like, oh, I'll just go along with things. You, like, quite more notoriously, you start to then act that out yourself and try to convince other people of that.
So say, for example, if someone's government or issues like a diktat or something, and you really believe that, say it's a lie,
Yeah.
but you actually internalise the lie and then you yourself begin to believe it, is that right?
Yeah, you yourself are actually believing it. So if anyone speaks out against that, you take that as a personal, like, no, they're standing up against my beliefs.
Right, yeah, got you.
Rather than,
Got
whereas, like, if you see somebody commit a crime, you know we shouldn't commit crimes, but a lot of them you're like, you know, like, it's, when you go, mate. You know what I mean? If it's not too serious. The other side to that is agentic theory, where you're acting as an agent for somebody else.
Yeah.
So you can you see this all the time, like companies or, you know, employees need to do this all the time. You know, you're given certain rights, you're wearing a certain hat, you have to engage in a certain role. That would be the positive side of that. It's necessary, but if you're then given, the only way that can work is if you're giving up responsibility to the person that's giving you the order, and the assumption that anything you do wrong, they will take the blame for it. But as you can see during World War II, how that led to drastic behaviour, or in experiments we're about to bring up. So first one I'd like to talk about is the Stanford prison experiment. I think most people have heard this. There was a movie that came out about it.
Yeah.
It's
yes.
probably one of the most famous psychological experiments, but it's because it's a doozy, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it was one of the first, if not the first case that we discussed in my ethics class at university.
Yeah.
And it's just, what a way to hook you in.
Yes.
Brilliant.
So it was 1971. They done the Stanford prison experiment, and it was an expansion on the Milgram experiments, which we're getting a wee bit later because they're kind of more foundational. But I think Stanford prison experiments are the most shocking of the two. And basically, yeah, they got 18 students, divided them up, 9 to be guards, 9 to be just prisoners. They all met each other beforehand, all talking, shaking, and then divided it up just by drawing straws. Divided them up, and they were supposed to survive or last for 2 weeks in this prison-like environment with the guards have certain responsibilities and roles to fulfill, and so did the prisoners. Within the experiment lasted 6 days, they had to cancel it.
Less than half the time.
Yeah, less than half the time, not even a week. It made through because it was getting too disturbing what was going on behind the scenes. And in day 3, somebody had a mental breakdown because of the situation they're in. So it got bad really fast, which nobody expected. You remember this? It's all people that were friends with each other.
Yeah.
And basically some of the activities the guards engaged in was stripping down the prisoners, sometimes because they'd done something minor, you know, like said, spoke back to them, or, you know, just didn't like the way they looked.
Yeah.
They
Did like the way they looked.
did like the way they looked, yeah. Hosed them down with fire extinguishers.
Yeah.
And we put them in solitary confinement. The only rules they had, they weren't allowed to beat them, and they weren't allowed to withhold food from them, food or like sustenance, you know, like nourishment. But they didn't do that, but they found creative ways. They basically hazed them. If you can imagine what you do in a college situation, but it got really bad and bad and bad. And it was quite funny because the guards ended up internalising their role and thinking, no, we actually are the good ones. There's a reason we've been selected to be the guards.
Yeah.
There's a reason they've been selected to be the prisoners, even though they've seen it was like a random draw.
Yes.
So, you know, from their point of view, if that was me thinking that, I would be thinking I could quite easily have been the prisoner in this situation. You know, well, I'd like to think that's what I believe. I could quite easily be the prisoner in this situation, so I need to kind of be a good guy as the guard because I could have quite easily been another person. But that thinking just seems to go away. There was a lot of criticism between the Stanford prison experiments saying they went too far and broke a lot of kind of ethical guidelines.
Why do you think that's important, the study itself?
I think it's important because it shows how fast things can deteriorate once these roles are set up with no checks and balances, because that was the main issue. There was no real checks and balances against any other authority coming in. Once they realised the researchers weren't really going to do much, you know, because that's the big authority hanging over the thing. We're free to do what we want here. Carte blanche. So the worst of them came out and the power went to their heads super fast. Like, you'd think if this experiment was done for a couple of months, you could maybe see that gradually they fell into the role.
Yeah, that'd make more sense.
Within, like, not even the last weekend, you were sitting talking to all these people, having a good time with them, shaking their hand, and then suddenly you're hosing them down, telling them to strip naked, and locking them in a room for 12 hours by himself. It's scary because when you look at that societal, more in a kind of as a society or the culture, how fast things could break down, and I think it's a lot faster than we think. Maybe we did see that in Germany, obviously. I've got another experiment for that, and that'd be the Milgram experiment. The performance experiment came in 1963 off the back of what happened in Nazi Germany. So in the 60s, I think as most people know. So
Milgram first, then Stanford.
Yeah, Milgram was in 1963. It's not as exciting, but I think it showed the more fundamental thing. And Milgram's actually came up with the agentic theory. It kind of showed that thing of how people act as agents when authorities kind of put them in that position to do so. It was to try and give a justification for how the Nazis managed to do what they'd done. And in the 60s, there was a big explosion of people looking at any like psychological backgrounds. Before that, they didn't even know what a serial killer was. Obviously, the Summer of Love happened in 1969 that kind of led from this. So it was in the culture at the time. And so basically, the experiment was set up between a participant would come in. They would think they could either become the teacher or the learner. They could ask questions or receive questions, but it was set up so they would always be the teacher. And then they would have to give questions to the learner who'd been in another room. If the learner got the wrong question, they were supposed to give them an electric shock. Every time they got a wrong question.
A real electric shock?
Yeah, a real electric shock. However, the person wasn't actually getting one. It was a paid actor.
Yes.
So they're coming through, speaking through the other side is like.
But from that perspective, or that
yeah, they totally believe they're actually shocking a real person.
Sure.
And then they would have a person in a lab coat sitting beside, telling them, you know, if they paused or kind of hesitated to do, they would just give them a wee prod. Like, oh, maybe you should do this, maybe you should continue. And that's disturbing as well, because 65% of all the participants went to the very last voltage, and every single participant went by 300 volts. Now, to put that in a bit of perspective, 300 volts would be a dangerous level to get shocked by, but probably not lethal. But at 450 volts, that could be a lethal shock. And obviously this was administered not just once, but maybe multiple times. To make it worse, in some variations of the experiment, not all of them, in the recording of the person speaking back to them, they would mention they have like a heart problem and it's acting up, or they're really getting painful and they're not being allowed to leave.
Yeah.
They're trying to quit the experiment and they're not being allowed to leave, and the participants still continued.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
terrifying as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely terrifying. And most people did like show distress. I said, like, even at that 65, a lot of people would turn and go, "Do you really want me to keep doing this?" But it will only take a couple of simple prods to come back down. I've actually wrote down kind of just simple commands. So if they fail to do it in the first attempt,
so this is the person administering the electricity.
Yeah. So if the teacher, who's the participant, the person being studied in the experiment, failed to then shock the person because they got a wrong answer,
they were then prodded.
Yep. Okay. They'd get prodded, and it'd be 4 different responses they'd get to try and get. If they still wouldn't shock them after the 4, they would end the experiment.
Sure.
And that person would be one of the lucky 35% that didn't actually fall into this. Yeah, but for prod 1 was just please continue. A lot of people would engage after that. And then number 2 would be the experiment requires you continue. Number 3 would be it is absolutely essential you continue with the experiment. And number 4 would be you have no other choice. So you can see through as they're going up this, they're slowly constraining the idea of you having like your own free will of this situation, and this was an attempt to try and induce a agentic state into the person. The last one, this is clear of you have no other choice. The implication being you're acting on my will here, not your own. So continue that. So what do you think about that? There's some other variations of the experiment, but what do you think of that? Just at its face.
Generally, on the face of it, it is terrifying. I mean, I'm aware of how easily the role of authority can play, how massive of importance that is, but as well coupled with the fact that sort of admonishment of guilt. Yeah. I was like, well, the guy over there in the white coat said it's fine. Yeah. It's like, I was just following orders. Yeah. We know that's not a good reason.
That's not a good reason.
There's a whole Nuremberg trial over that sort of stuff.
It kind of reminds me of somebody out their mind a wee bit,
Yeah.
Like, there's this devil that appears in my mirror, tells me to hurt people, so it's not my fault, you know what I mean? Blame the devil, and you're like,
But again, the other concern for myself was it comes back to, much like I said in the Asch experiment, how malleable people actually are.
Yeah.
Because effectively, if you're under the belief of that or you're actually administering electrical shocks, painful electrical shocks to someone, and you're quite happy just to watch and do that, and you have just no sort of hesitation, how quickly an individual, an upstanding person, your average person in the street, could just descend into like almost like savagery. Yeah, it reminds me of William Golding's book. I've just literally forgot the name. The Island, the Boys of the Island. Ralph and Piggy.
Fire.
Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies.
I can't believe we forgot.
I don't know what fire. The F you got it there though.
Well, they had the fire because again, but anyway, the point being in that book as well, how quickly they descend into savagery. But that's with them, being stripped of all
societal programming,
textbooks, anything at all, everything being stripped away.
Supervision.
Yeah, everything's gone. You're literally on an island, whereas these people have pretty much everything sorted. You're just in an experiment in this instance, and you're very easily willing to administer pain and effectively torture onto another human being. Yeah,
well, I think both are examples of like the Lord of the Flies example of like anarchy.
Yeah.
And how when everything breaks down, you've got no thought, like a kind of authoritative structures, new ones are forming, how that's dangerous. Where this is all the way about when these authoritative structures get too restraining, it's more into the tyranny aspect and authority and how easily it is to convince people to do horrible things.
Well, that's the thing. So the other point being is a concern due to the fact that this is a trivial, effectively, experiment.
Yeah.
You're not in war times.
No.
Your city's not getting bombed.
You've been informed. You're allowed to leave whenever you want.
Absolutely.
At the beginning of the experiment, So it's like
it's a safe space.
Exactly.
And you're still willing to commit such acts.
Yeah.
It just means to be a more serious situation, what's going to happen? And again, it's sort of we'll touch on this later on, but it sort of underpins the people that say quite comfortably and they assert quite confidently that I wouldn't have been a participant in Nazi Germany. Yeah. As we'll come to discover, probably were.
Probably would have been, yeah. And like even myself, when you think about it, like again, I would like to think I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
I think I would. I think now.
Same for the avoidance of
doubt. Yeah. I'd like to think. Yeah. Oh, the good old days. But if I think the only reason I'd maybe not do it now is because I've studied this stuff, so I'd hopefully see what's going on.
Yes.
And I'd be like, okay, I'm in this situation, I get what's happening here, and maybe I can resist it a bit. But I would probably still comply to a degree.
Yes.
Because, to be realistic, what am I going to, how would I fight it? You'd probably just need to keep your head down and get on.
Well, I mean, the only sort of medicine in your instance for potentially not falling into the trap is because you've studied it. Yeah. You've looked at the experiments, so you can see, that's appeared before, that's a pattern. There's something there.
I'm an Milgram experiment here.
I ought to be aware here. So that's obviously fortunate in your case, fortunate in maybe my case. Doesn't mean it's going to come to fruition in a positive way, but also all the individuals that haven't been aware of that situation, that's a complete new experiment for them effectively.
Yeah. Well, it got worse. I couldn't actually find this experiment and I was looking for it, and you see me getting frustrated as I was trying to find it the other day, but it was I
always get frustrated with you, Ryan, don't worry.
Me too, Connor, me too. But it was a rabbit experiment where they bring in a rabbit.
Sure.
And basically they had to give the rabbit electric shocks. The same, I think it was actually off the series of the Milgram experiments. They had to give the rabbit shocks in increasing manner to eventually kill the rabbit.
Right.
You can do that to rabbits, you can't do that to people. You know, maybe get a lot more information that way, but it's unethical.
Yeah.
Probably unethical with the rabbit as well in modern day times. But as we're going through this, I thought this one was going to be a lot lower because they let the participants play with the rabbit before they put it and give it a wee name and all that, you know, put it back in its box.
Yeah.
And but with that, I think it was around half of men end up killing the rabbit, where it was over 90% of women. Now the facts are maybe a bit off because I couldn't find it, but that one always stuck with me because one, I thought it'd be the opposite way around. I thought the men would have murdered the rabbit in far larger numbers because
I would have assumed that too.
Yeah, I just assumed that was the way I was going in. Like, the guys are probably going to fall for that one a lot worse, but apparently no. But that was more, the women that did it were much more upset about doing it.
Yeah.
But they still done it. But they done the same situation, have somebody in a lab coat there kind of prodding you along, going,
Yes.
No, you need to kill the rabbit, you need to do this. And I think that's an important thing to do because the Milgram experiment does have some variations and caveats to it. One of the caveats is it was all men that participated in the experiment.
Yeah.
You know, it came out in the 60s, you know, like you could tell they didn't really like they were more trying to study what happened in Nazi Germany. It was mostly men like doing all the evil stuff in Nazi Germany, so I think that was part of that process. But it's just to show when they done the rabbit experiment that it's not exclusive to either gender. This is like everyone's affected by this.
Yeah.
Really bad, you know. And I think the rabbit just had a certain tone on it. It was maybe why women done that more, because they'll try to kind of do that in the experiment, I think, to kind of show that it's not just men.
Yes.
This falls to. But there's other variations of the Milgram experiment, and just how this affects the conformity or the obedience. So what would you think would happen if they took off the uniform?
The participants.
So let's say the lab instructor, he's there with a lab coat, he's got a clipboard, he's, you know, the person giving you the prodding doesn't have a lab coat on, just wearing a suit.
I would assume it would fall because the framing of that individual no longer suggests to me that he's an authority figure.
Yeah.
So his words and instruction would hold less weight.
Yeah, so how much roughly do you think it would fall by?
Oh, I couldn't even hazard a guess. Maybe I'd like to say about 20%.
Pretty much bang on.
Oh really?
yeah. Well done.
I wasn't scripted.
well done. No, Jenny, listen.
20%,
20% drop.
Oh, wow.
Aye, 20% drop. Bang on. No, that's really good. Got me stumped there a moment. No, hide my notes. That was very good. I can't believe you got the 20% drop on the spot.
No, right. Complete fluke.
Okay, let's see if you keep this going then.
Okay.
So, in the second variation, or the third variation, they didn't hold it in Yale, which the original one was held in the Yale University. So it's a prestigious
university.
Prestigious institution. This time they decided to run it in a run-down office block, and they got the students in there. So, do you think that'd be a drop or an increase?
I would yield to like dilapidated effectively.
Yeah.
I would assume a fall then.
A fall, yeah. So
Don't know how much though.
how much roughly? 65% originally. So what do you think it would drop down to?
I think it would go to be about 50%. So
50%?
15% fall.
Yeah, pretty much on.
Is it?
Aye, well, 47% it fell to. So
Right.
3% off. I got good marks here.
Feeling lucky now. I hate this joke. I'm going to put the lottery on now. First gamble ever.
Right, so if there was a second person in the room, like a second lab coat scientist guy to oversee the situation,
Okay.
do you think it would fall or increase?
So just one initially.
There's
then
just
it goes-
one guy initially, and then they
then it
brought
goes
they brought an assistant for him.
I would say that then it would increase.
Increase. What do you think it would increase to?
What is it currently at?
65%. This is the baseline.
65. I don't think it would tick up that much. I'd say about up to 73% or something.
92.5.
92.5.
92.5. Yeah.
Wow.
Just for that one extra person. That's why you pays to have armed people around you.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't armed. There was just a clipboard, but you know, I imagine with a gun, it was 100.
That is really, again, this comes back to maybe the Asch experiment as well.
Yeah.
That you only need, like, say, either 3 people on one side to inform a decision one way, or one person being contrarian
Yeah.
to completely
Well,
nullify things.
it's funny you bring that up because one of the last kind of variations they done was to bring in 2 people being a teacher with two two participants that were actors, of course, taking the questions, and then they would get the other person who'd been an actor as well, the other participant, they'd get him to reject at one point and walk away. Some experiment. What do you think it would be then?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm going we go for stay the same.
Drop all the way down to 10%.
Drop all the way down.
Yeah, so it does show you like how much we're taking social cues.
Absolutely.
You get a second guy and go, oh, that's a bit dodgy. There's two of them now.
Yeah.
Even though they can't do anything to you, nearly everyone does it, and then you get one guy who goes, nah, I'm not taking this.
Yeah.
Drops all the way to 10.
Yeah.
Which is really the positive in that is if you're ever in a situation where you see that going on, just you being the one to stand up and speak out about it can change the whole situation.
Yeah. You are Spartacus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but like you can see that in, like they've always said that in Nazi Germany. It's like what went wrong is good men stopped doing what they were supposed to be doing.
Absolutely.
And you think, oh well, I'm outnumbered, but it doesn't really matter if you're outnumbered because most people are these people in the middle where they're just going along with the flow, and you've got a couple of people trying to develop that into a bad situation for what they want. You've got people that don't want that to happen. But
Yes.
if you're one of the people that doesn't want that to happen, and you actually stick your head like up against the parapet, being willing to be the nail that gets hit by the hammer,
Yeah.
then you're going to turn the majority of people against the people trying to direct them.
Yes.
Because deep down they probably do know. That's the scary thing about it.
Well, just one thing, one quote just to sort of add to that is monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men.
Aye, so who's that from?
I don't know.
A common man.
I will find it and I will put it up
Yeah,
purposely. I couldn't
yeah.
get it. We were rushed for the last
that's
last few quotes.
No, that's fine.
So that was a quite good one. But just to add on to your current experiments that you've mentioned so far.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one that I checked out earlier on, and it was the Hofling. I believe it was 1966. So just one thing to add on experiment-wise to the list that you have. I found one earlier on I thought was worth raising. And again, be ready to be scared again. So the thing being here, the Hofling hospital experiment. 1966.
Yeah.
Now, this is where there were 22 nurses. They were blind, and again, by meaning that they weren't privy to the actual experiment itself. They were just, going about their normal day. For example,
not just blind nurses kicking about the
not just
NHS.
blind nurses again, for the avoidance of doubt. So 22 of them effectively are instructed to give a patient drug X. Now, drug X doesn't actually exist, right? It's not a real drug. The lethal dosage is...
I thought Elon Musk had branched out even further there.
Oh, yeah. 22 nurses are instructed to give their patient this drug, medicine X, for example. They're instructed to give them 20 milligrams, where quite clearly on the bottle, 10 milligrams is the lethal dosage, i.e., exceed this or hit this and you die, or patient dies. So there was 3 rules effectively that were broken from this experiment, and one was there was no phone calls to be passed via there was no instructions to be passed via phone calls.
Yeah.
As in a doctor couldn't just phone you and give you an order. The medicine itself didn't actually exist in the inventory stock list. It was a new medicine for these nurses effectively, and it was also double the dosage, right? So what they found is that when the doctor phones the nurse and says give medicine X to patient Y, give them 20 milligrams of medicine X. Out of the 22 nurses, how many do you think conformed and administered?
Well, before studying this, I would say hopefully probably about half, but after reading this, I think it's going to be a lot more. 17.
17 out of 22.
Yeah, it's going to be
I
bad.
would prefer your numbers. It's actually 21 out of 22. So 95% would conform. So they'd go against the phone instruction by taking it and listening to it. Use a medicine that is not prohibited and doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in this case, it's a sugar pill.
Yeah.
But also the lethal dosage was double double, and it states it on the bottle. Now, again, that's an issue with the role of authority.
Yeah.
Just because a doctor or someone's telling you to do something, there's cognitive dissonance there.
Yeah.
You're disengaging. You're no longer having critical thought. But also, one interesting thing, they had a control group running as well, and then I believe they showed them the results thereafter, and basically were saying, wow, look at all these nurses that conformed and basically killed patients. 95% of them adhered to it. What would you guys do, guys and girls?
Yeah.
So 31 out of 33 said, that wouldn't be me. That I wouldn't do that. Now again,
you need to think of the other two, man.
That's a very good point.
You know, being that go, they've done nothing wrong there. You know, I murder patients all the time.
Exactly. Well, to be fair, maybe they're just actually giving an honest answer, the
Aye.
same way that we do.
Yeah.
Which should be
I
actually
don't know.
looked at quite favourably.
Yeah.
The other concern is actually, the 31 out of the 33 that say, no, we wouldn't. We're virtuous. We're holier than thou. We wouldn't do such thing. When you know that's not the case, because, well, we've seen it in previous experiments.
Yeah.
You've got that, what would you do type thing. That's, you're comforted, you're in the blanket of, I don't actually have to do anything.
Yeah.
You're in that theoretical state as opposed to practical. So this is the practical. Also, the study was actually repeated again by Rank and Jacobson, but 10 years later, I think it was 1977. And they actually used a real drug this time, an actual drug that the nurses would know, but they didn't find the same results. But their rationale as to why they didn't find the same results was because that the nurses are aware of that drug and know that it's pitfalls, etc. etc.
Well,
or
yeah,
they know the experiment.
Yeah.
So
I think what they're saying is probably more true, but that doesn't make sense because if you look at obedience, then it breaks down into two categories, doesn't it? You get the legitimised authority.
Yeah.
Whereas their authority because of knowledge, that'd be the doctor. But then you've also got this, you've also got this other knowledge, and the other side where you now know you're looking directly at the bottle, so you've got evidence literally staring you in the face that that's wrong. You do know the drug, so you're not going to question it. You go, So people that might break down on the legitimised authority, which is quite good to know. If you actually show people the truth, they'll get rid of that.
Yes.
But the people acting under an agentic state, where they're just following the orders because that person will take the responsibility, they're still engaging in the activity.
Well,
which
absolutely.
Why still
So it comes back to if rules are immoral, then it is immoral to follow them.
Yeah. Which is quite bad that way, where people are just like, this will probably mess them up, but it's not going to be my neck in the noose.
Exactly.
So I'm just going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
Which is just laziness and incompetence, really.
Absolutely.
Aye.
Yeah. So that was the last one I wanted to add into.
No, that's brilliant. So you've been reading a book.
First one.
I'm glad you finally got there, Connor. Those wise were tricking you out for a while.
The Cat in the Hat.
An Ordinary Men. And I
Yes.
think that whole book kind of goes through the whole structure of what we've been talking about today.
That's correct.
It covers every point. So would you like to maybe give a wee overview of that?
Yeah, sure. I'll try not to give too much away. It is actually on Netflix now. I think it just got added the other day. But, I do actually have the book. And it's highlighted and stuff. So it's from Christopher Browning.
Couldn't get him on today, he was busy.
It was, but invitations there. So effectively, Ordinary Men, fantastic book. If you don't want to read the book, obviously get a Netflix special. It's like one for 50 odd minutes. So effectively, Christopher Browning, he's citing in this instance that the pressure to conform on the group in this instance was a major reason for the men in the groups to start committing heinous acts. Now, the heinous acts we're talking about in this instance is those committed by Police Battalion 101 in Nazi Germany. Now, they were in Poland, but it was obviously the Nazis that created these basically police battalions.
And were they German battalions or were they Polish battalions?
They're German. They're German.
Over, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. They're German, but they weren't like normal fighting age men and all that stuff. It was like just as a clue in the title, they were just ordinary men.
Yeah.
But from March, this is one of the staggering stats that is opened.
Which is important that they'll normally use men because it means they weren't in Hitler Youth or anything either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They were just older guys and all that stuff. There's a whole. I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah. That's important though.
It's really good. The fact that in the preface or the preface of this book, they talk about that in March 1942, 80% So 80% of all the victims of the Holocaust were still alive. Obviously meaning 20% were dead. And just 11 months later, those stats were reversed, which is harrowing.
Yeah.
Now, the reason why this is such a concern is ordinary men...
I thought I had a bad year.
Well, the reason why this is so harrowing is that the fact that ordinary men were drafted in to round up Jews in various villages and put the men to work in, you know, concentration camps, death camps.
Work will set you free.
The women and the children were to be rounded up, taken into the forest, and just shot at point blank range. I believe it's General or Major Trapp. I think it was Major Trapp, the chap, was the one that basically grabbed these guys and said, "Listen, chaps, here's the situation. Orders from above, just following orders. We need to round up all these Jews and just kill them. Just flatline, just kill men, put to work camps, women and children just shot dead. There and then. That police battalion themselves, I think they killed 1,500 people. They were doing shootings 17 hours a day. Now, the concern really is from the start. The start being that Major Trapp had all the chaps in a line, didn't tell them what was going to be happening, what was going to be done, and then he did, and offered the men that were not willing to do it an excuse to say, no, you can still be part of the team here, but you won't be participating in any of the killings at all. You won't be participating, you won't see it. You would just be like, you know, doing like cleaning the dishes, cleaning the latrine and all that sort of stuff. For a good sort of moment in the lineup, no one moved.
Yeah.
And again, like we've been touched on from Asch and previous experiments, all it takes is one person to sort of get that that rock moving down the hill or push the boulder. And a few did. Don't get me wrong, a few did, but the vast majority, you know, excess of 75%.
Yeah, which is that number keeps coming up. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. But the interesting thing is the chaps that didn't participate in the killing were actually ostracised effectively from their group because they weren't then seeing it. That sort of like killing.
Yeah, you're seeing they're all like all three of the topics we've talked about. You know, you basically got the exact same as Asch's line experiment, but for a moral situation. You know, what's the moral action? You can go and murder all these people, or you can not. You know, and there's the obvious answer, but because nobody's moving, you're still staying in that line going, "No, I don't know what to do." But then you've got that conformity as well. If you can, like that deeper conformity where you don't want to be ostracised from the group, you want to be liked. And then you've also got what you've seen from the Milgram experiment. You've got the general there in his outfit saying like, "No, this is what you should be doing." Even though he's giving you a way out, like they did in the Milgram experiment. You know, you don't need to be here, but most people continue along. A couple of proddings, you know.
Bearing in mind though as well the fact that those individuals or those guys in that group were already away from home. They weren't actually local to the area. They were, you know, sent out there to commit these acts. So their new family, their new tribe, were these chaps. And you're now in with basically monsters.
Also, that comes back to, it's one of the things I didn't mention in the Milgram experiment, but like distance, either psychologically or physically from the act also increases the likelihood you're going to do it. You know, or decreases it from the authority because you're more removed from authority. So if the authority's telling you to do it through your phone rather than face to face, you're less likely to disobey. You know, and but then they're being removed from their families in a different country. You know, they're not, that kind of puts up a psychological barrier, I'd imagine, as well, because you're not dealing with my people. You know, it's hot harrowing, that stuff, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's mainly because as well that it can just stem from very early brainwashing. Who do you hate? Oh, that's the enemy. Why do we hate them? It doesn't really matter, but you just know they're against.
It's almost like placing those triggers in people that you can maybe use at a later date. And that, which does happen. We know it happens because if you read Hitler Youth, that's what Hitler Youth was about. You know, like any society from history that you're allowed to examine because they've collapsed now. You know, if you do it to a current one, then people get all funny.
Well, that's exactly. Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, just and at the risk of you know talking about it, if you and I were born in a different area, completely in the world, our beliefs may be wildly different.
Oh, they would be.
And again, there's a nature nurture argument, but a lot of times as well is your immediate peer group, your society, your school, etc. And if you've all got like a common enemy, it's very easy to become tribal, because you don't want to be ostracised, because then you get no access to like food, resources.
You're dead.
Women, you're dead effectively.
You're dead.
We discussed that in episode 1.
Yeah.
And that manifests throughout.
Yeah.
So it's a real concern.
It's that illusion we have in the modern day society though, that there is a tribe anymore. Because like you don't have, like, you build a tribe now in today's world, if you're going to be honest about it. You don't have one. But again, the conformity thing can lead to conflict down the road, because people think we're not all united as the United Kingdom or Scotland or whatever way you want to cut it. You know, you've got clubs, you've got your family, you've got your friend circle. You're all, modern day times, you're linked to all these wee micro tribes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And held within a bigger tribe. And you see that now with the internet. Now anyone can talk to anyone, so it's not localised by geography anymore.
Yeah.
And you're seeing all these different groups form over the weirdest stuff. As well as we mentioned furries in the last podcast.
I knew that was coming back up.
Don't know what it was, but you get these tribes for the weirdest things, you know.
Just anecdotally see them at people that have come up to me and said, "How do you not know what that is?" And I was like, I don't Google that.
You're lucky it's just not came to you yet, Connor. Version, but you've got these communities over the weirdest stuff nowadays, and people's identities are calling them into like conform to these groups. But then you've got another group over the other side, and they're doing the same thing over the opposite opinion.
Yes.
What's going to happen to those two groups
when worlds collide?
Worlds collide, they need to eventually like come out of their programming.
Yes, absolutely.
Or they're going to fight.
There was one other thing I wanted to touch on. I wanted to go into more depth with this, but this is probably again a talk for another point. But just briefly touching on it right now, there's another reference, Matthias Desmet, I believe, and he was talking about mass formation psychosis. Now again, there's 4 things that he looks at of how this happens, and one is a lack of social bonding. Obviously you've got that because I remember Theresa May created the lonely minister, or minister for loneliness. Probably is a lonely minister, but the second thing is a lack of meaning in general sense making in society. 3, there's high levels of free floating anxiety, and 4, there's free floating levels of frustration and aggression. Now I think we could probably see that in society. We do see that in society right now, but I think that is also probably increasing the likelihood of people conforming, being obedient, and being what's the other one? Compliant.
Yeah.
I always forget that.
It's because we've not touched it as much. It's the one that's got the least experiment kind of data behind it, so it's hard to talk about. You know, we'll maybe cover that in a wee shorter video at some point.
Yeah, I could do.
No, I totally agree. Like, well, what they've done, I remember this off the top of my head, really, with the Milgram experiment. They did continue. It was 1963, the original one. They did it again in the 80s, and they've also done it in different places. And you did get 65% was the original number. That number would go up and down depending on where they'd done it. Yeah. Which is quite, I mean, everyone kind of knows the experiment now, so it's kind of out there, but you could jig it up a bit to see. But it would actually be a good test to see where your society kind of is. Yes. You know what I mean? Because they done it in Germany just after then, you know, like about the same time. After they wanted the series, so they done it in Germany, and it was really high in Germany. I think it was like 80+%, and this is after the Nazis, you know, because their culture was still very unobedient culture, you know, and the German, like, different cultures are different, you know. Whereas they done it in America, I think, in the 80s, and it was less. Would be been in the 60s, as you can imagine, the culture's shifted. They had the sexual revolution, and things had loosened up a bit. But it'd be interesting to do it now, and it'd be interesting to see what different groups of like political beliefs and such are like fall more in line. That should be, if I had to go with capital, that'd be something I would like to do. But
we discussed we wanted to go and do our own experiment with the Asch type thing. We wanted to go and do something equivalent to see how that would actually transpire now. But again, just to briefly come back to those 4 points with Matthias Desmet, when you were talking about the 2 tribes, effectively, 2 big teams. I think much in the same way people vote with their feet. I think that's, if you looked under the bonnet of these bigger tribes, what's the rationale for you doing that? Because again, if people being obedient, you know, start, you know, internalizing potential lies, be it for whatever reason. Well, why is that? Is there like a lack of social cohesion right now? Are people generally anxious? We know that is the case. It's just it's so interesting to see all these myriad of factors and how they all have an implication and a bearing, and how that affects an individual. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, it's the waters you need to swim in. That's the thing, because even if you like inoculate yourself through education, which is the only way you can fight this really, again, you need to learn this stuff, then be aware enough and in the moment enough to go, this is happening to me.
Yeah.
But people don't. Well, hopefully we've helped everyone at home be a wee bit more inoculated against any future tyranny that might be following us. And
don't jinx it now.
Don't jinx that. Well, if you get 2 people to stand up, that 2 people can lead to 20. And we found that with the data, so that'd be worthwhile.
Yeah, so there is actually a power in one.
Yeah, there's power in everyone's voice.
Yeah. So
anyway,
don't waste it.
Don't waste it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And thanks. I think that's all.
Yeah, nothing.
Don't waste it, folks.
Don't waste it. Yeah. And, thank you very much, I guess. Yeah.